Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Christine Salas. I'm the HTPA Community Director, and this is our Healer Development Series to deepen your healing touch practice. And today's topic is on grief. And we have an amazing panel today of practitioners and instructors to share their knowledge and expertise with us on working with clients experiencing grief. We are recording this event. It will be sent out to all of you that had registered, and it'll also be put on the HTPA member portal, usually in about a week. And I ask you all to mute yourselves so that we can hear the wonderful things our panelists are going to share with us today. We will have some time, hopefully, for questions at the end. And when we get to that part of the agenda, I will ask you to put your questions into the chat box. And then we'll try to get to as many of those questions as possible in the time we have. So now to introduce our lovely panelists. So we have Marilyn Allpress. Marilyn was a single mom who got her accounting designation while raising 2 children and working a management job. She suffered from IBS, went back to yoga classes, changed her diet, started looking for healthy ways to take care of herself. And she became a certified reflexologist in 1993, and then moved on to aromatherapy and has taken many courses, resulting in many certifications. When taking the aromatherapy course, her partner was doing therapeutic touch for her, and she was amazed at the feelings, the sensations, and how well she felt afterwards. She was in grief at the time after the passing of her youngest brother, and she then found a course in healing touch and went on to complete all the levels, and then took advanced practice 1 and 2 and anatomy for healers. She has taught yoga and meditation for over 20 years and is a certified yoga teacher. Welcome, Marilyn. Happy to have you here. And then we have Elizabeth Combs. Elizabeth is a student, healer, mentor, and guide in the fields of energy medicine, plant medicine, yoga, and the expansion of higher consciousness on the planet. She shares her gifts with compassion and deep regard for her clients' own innate divinity and wholeness. Elizabeth envisions her role to awaken, nourish, strengthen, and accompany each other's inner healer. She is ever grateful to the many teachings along the path. Elizabeth enjoys daily walks in nature, chanting, singing, playing her crystal singing bowls, and she is pretty sure it is never too late to figure out what you want to be when you grow up. Elizabeth cherishes being a mom to her son, Jack, and a daughter of her parents, Roma and Linda. Welcome, Elizabeth. Thanks for being here. And then we have Penelope Ann Denton. She goes by Penny. Penny shifted her healing practices of being a registered critical care nurse to launching into her energy studies over 27 years ago, and became a certified healing touch practitioner in 2003. Penny leads her special healing gifts to Prince Rupert and many surrounding Indigenous villages on the coast of northern British Columbia, set just south of Alaska. For over 20 years, Penny has worked beside an educator, parenting consultant, counselor, and friend, conducting self-discovery programs. They also travel to the local First Nation villages by sea, plane, or water taxi, doing healing workshops. Penny is a co-facilitator for the traumatic loss support groups through the RCMP Victim Support Services. Healing touch is part of all the workshops. Along with this carrier, Penny has participated in many board of directors, appointments from both the federal and provincial governments. Penny lives a wonderful life with her husband, Brian, 2 grown children and 3 grandchildren. The North has offered a great outdoor lifestyle, biking, kayaking, skiing. Along with Penny's formal education, she has been a solid community advocate, Her professional experience in education is extensive, and most importantly now, she is dedicated to her healing touch practice. Welcome, Penny. Nice to have you. And then finally, we have Victoria Stewart. Victoria is a Healing Touch certified practitioner, level 1 instructor, qualified mentor, and Healing Touch for Animals certified practitioner. Her path to becoming a Healing Touch practitioner started when her brother was dying from melanoma cancer in 1997. She knew there was something out there to help him make a peaceful transition, and her search led her to Healing Touch. Victoria is also a board member of the Healing Touch Worldwide Foundation. Welcome, Victoria. Nice to have you. So as you all can see, we have a great panel today, lots of experience here. So I'm going to let each of them just share a little bit more about their experience in working with clients, specifically with grief. And I will start, let me go back up here. I'll start with you, Marilyn.
Hello. Well, I took my first class in Healing Touch in the spring of 1994. And in the fall of 1994, I started teaching introductory classes at the local college at the request of my teacher. At that point in time, the teachers in Toronto, the leaders in Toronto, were very involved in AIDS Committee Toronto. So it was a natural progression to work with palliative care and to work with grief. And most of my work in palliative was in cancer and AIDS. And I discovered very quickly that you don't work in palliative care without moving on and working with grief as well. We often worked in groups and took turns treating the AIDS patients, and then we had to find out ways to deal with our own grief. So we helped each other through that, and it was an amazing learning experience to help other people when they were grieving. I went to a workshop that was my biggest help with grief. It was a weekend long, 3-day long seminar with Catherine Fanshawe. And I learned 4 things from that. 1, everything in grief is unique and normal. 2, create rituals to help with your own grief, your own healing. 3, share those with those who are interested, only those who are interested, and work within the belief system of the person who is in grief. Working with people in grief and people who are palliative, I have found, is a very, very rich work. It needs a lot of self-care, but it's a very rich work. And for me, I just feel that it has been an absolute honor to be able to do this kind of work. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. Those 4 tips you shared, very powerful. Thank you. And how about you, Elizabeth? Could you share a little bit more?
Sure, thank you. I've been a Healing Touch certified practitioner. This is my 6th year, but for about 15 years previously, I have done, I had a Reiki and medical intuitive practice. So I made my way finally to Healing Touch. It was like, oh, I'm home, when I found that. And before that, as a yoga teacher for many, many years, that's really where, so I've been teaching yoga for 25 or 30 years. And just noticing how much people could hold in their bodies, and that sometimes people would just have tears in a yoga class. And I remember someone calling me over, and they're like, I'm crying. Is this okay? And I just said, it's great. Yes. What do you need? And they're like, I just need to cry. And so this person just cried and then went on with the class. And We just all need some accompaniment. You know, that's just what has come through for me in my practice and with most of the people that come to me who are in some kind of grief. Almost everyone is in some kind of grief. Some of this is just the world that we're living in, the time that we're living in. There's so much to grieve at a personal and individual level, cultural level, earth grief. Um, there's just there's so much there. And then the other thing I notice is working with people who are in either acute grief or a more chronic state of grief. And so those ancestral patterns or the earth grief or the grief that isn't even named. I work with people a lot with this kind of chronic grief and what that might look like. Um, and this the other thing I'll say is what feels the most important to me, and I love this work. I'd say probably 60 or 70% of the people I work with are dealing with grief at some level. It's like it's just underneath. You just keep going and it's underneath everything because it's a normal universal human experience, right? But having that necessary steady accompaniment, that's what I hear and see that people want and need so much because we've lost so much ritual. Like Marilyn mentioned, the rituals, like we've lost a lot of them in our particular Western culture that's disconnected in so many ways. We've lost the family connections. We've lost a lot of just those ways that we would carry through a normal experience of loss. So anyway, I'll stop there. I'm so glad to be here with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And how about you, Penny? Could you share a little bit more?
When I was a registered nurse, and many years ago a nursing supervisor before though that position was deleted. And as a nursing supervisor, we dealt always with those that have passed over, came in from car accidents, from the stillbirth to extended care. And so every day we dealt with death and dying and grief and sorrow as a nursing supervisor for the whole hospital here in Prince Rupert. I only wish that I knew then what I know now about grief and loss. And I know through our workshops that change is grief, that loss from anything, your partner, death, a job, your profession, moving, divorce, all of those changes are grief. So in healing workshops, the basic premise is that everyone is grieving as well. There's a lot of joy, of course, on the other side, but we're talking about grief today. And I think just being able to support people through their sorrow to get to their joy and to maybe help them live a little, the compassionate listening that we do. And when they're ready, after the connection, a bit of direction. It's an honor and privilege. And through the trauma support groups through the RCMP, we took a bereavement course through that to become facilitators. And so every day, every experience, every time we gather, we learn a little bit more together.
Great,
So,
thank you.
thank you.
And Victoria, will you share a little bit more?
Sure. I mean, I think I have experienced many losses in my life since I was very young. And I think that through that, I became very compassionate about the work that I do. From 2014 to just recently in 2022, I did work with palliative care. people out of a hospital, and most of them had cancer. But I would have to say that listening is active listening is probably the key role for someone to be heard, as they're able to, voice how they're feeling and what they're going through. And I feel like, whether, like Penny said, it can be a loss of a loved one, it can be a loss of a job, it can be loss of a body part, it can be life is just ever changing. So whether you move or whether you have grandkids or whether you are empty nesters, there's still grief involved. If you retire from your job, there's a grief there because there's a change. And it's about coming to terms with doing something different or without somebody. Yeah. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Great. So now kind of moving on to our first question regarding, what common intake assessment or energetic patterns, if any, that you find with clients with grief. And Penny, if you wouldn't mind answering that for us.
Oh, thank you. At the beginning of our gatherings several days ago, I am not sure who mentioned that this would be about healing touch and the intake assessment and energetic patterns of healing touch. And I mentioned at the time, and I will talk about the fact that my assessment and intake actually come before the client is on the table. That my assessment intake begins with the call, or the text, the phone call, or just the way that people approach me to see whether they're going to come for a healing touch session. I have a practice in my home. We have a small community here. There's about 12,000 people. And so someone could greet me in the grocery store and say, I should come and see you for some healing. And it begins then, the assessment, whether we continue to be in touch, whether they continue to even follow up with their idea of coming. It's all an assessment and an intake. So even yesterday, as an example, I, from my colleague, got a call, can you see someone immediately? And yes, I can, the crisis situation. So that intake depends the crisis, whether it's in 2 weeks from now, an appointment, or whether it's come in the door immediately. That's where my assessment begins. And then how they come in the door, because we have an ocean view in front of us, their presentation energetically when they walk in the door, the posture, whether they even see the view or whether they just need to lay on the table. So for the most part, when clients come, I have them sit and give education first, find out really why they have come to see me, what is the reason, prior to their intent, actually. And I oversee a bit of education through Barbara Ann Brennan's energetic tours, showing them what energetic our goal is, where energetically they might be beside themselves or receiving other people's energy. So I spend up to, not over, an hour often just with compassionate listening, talking about mindfulness, being totally present. And the goal of the healing touch is to bring them into their body. So that education piece depends on where they are in their grief, whether they can accept information or not, or whether they just need someone to join them with tears and empathy, that compassionate listening, a stranger hearing their story of their loved one. So that is where I begin that whole hour, of course, as you will all know from your own experience what that is like. I must say, I recognize I'm not a counselor, and I am a resource for the counseling, and but it's to just give that time for someone to actually be heard about their suffering, to relieve their suffering. And that's before they lay on the table. Laying on the table depends also how they get there, whether they need assistance or whether they pop up on the table. It's warmed. I have candles, I have music, tissue I hand to them. And then I do the energetic assessment following that. So would you like me to continue on the energetic assessment, or is that enough time?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I use a pendulum, and of course with my hands as well. Usually I find in the assessment energetically with my pendulum is the crown chakra is usually open, and the brow. And then the assessment from there down varies considerably with clients. Most clients are not grounded at all. The pendulum shows that. The assessment of their field shows that. And so I follow from there where they are energetically. And as Janet Magnan said, you feel the energy and do the work. I usually have a plan on the following the patterns, but as we all know, you have a plan and then you do the work, and it often shifts and changes around that. I find that the magnetic unruffling quickly gets them into their body, and I do a talk with them to connect to heaven and earth, helping them ground so that I can do the work more consistently, clearing the field first and then doing the chakra connections. I find it quickly shifts, and then halfway through that energetic pattern will shift back again to what is normal for them, and then it will shift. And usually by the time I'm finished 3/4 of an hour on the table to 45 minutes, the field I can feel is open, and the energetic patterns, the chakras are open as they should be.
Great. Thank you, Penny. And Elizabeth, you want to add to that?
Yes, thank you. And I just want to honor all of what Penny just shared, because so much of it, I don't want to repeat everything that she said, but that idea of just the necessity of compassionate listening and having just allowing a lot of time. And then also that the assessment starts with the very first interaction, certainly before anyone is on the table. And the other thing I meant to add is my practice is about, now it's about 90% distance, but even before the pandemic, it was a 60% distance. So I work with people a lot over distance, not just on the table. So, I mean, they get on the table or wherever, but I may not be in the room with them. So that's just a big aspect of my practice. So anyway, in terms of that intake, just really listening and letting people talk, letting that person, just allowing lots of space. It may be, in the case of an acute grief, that usually happens right away. In the more chronic grief, which I use Francis Weller's 5 Gates of Grief. I find that very helpful for me. So the first one is that everything we love, we will lose. And we've all talked about that one quite a bit already. But the other ones, are, the second one is the places that have not known love. And so that's something that will come up in, someone might not come in saying, I'm grieving, but that's what we get to. Another one of those is the sorrows of the world. And that's very big right now, especially in many younger people that I'm seeing. And then the fourth one is what we expected and did not receive, the grief of that. So holding a space for that. And then the fifth one is ancestral grief. So those more chronic griefs, I ask a lot of questions kind of once their initial sharing has ended, and just let their answers take us toward where the healing is wanting to be held today on this particular day. I really listen to the language that they use about themselves or their experience. There tends to be a lot of self-judgment and just a lack of self-compassion that is an outcome of life in the dominant culture. I know I should be over this. I went to the funeral and this is done, or it's been so long. That was 10 years ago. Those sorts of, that was 30 years ago. That was 50 years ago. So those things, just making space for that. And so really, yeah, there's that opportunity to listen to everything that's being said, the word choice, the sighs, the pauses, allowing time for silence, and that it's almost like I just don't look at the clock. I definitely want them to have an energy treatment, but they're always, as Penny mentioned, they're out of their body usually, but when folks start talking, they're coming back in a little bit, right? Because there's this co-created safe space. So let me go on to assessment. I use a pendulum, a hand scan, and my inner vision, and of course all that listening, all that personal, just looking at what their face looks like, how they carry themselves, body language, how they move. Do they wait to be invited? Do people just jump right up on the table? Some people just want to jump on the table. They don't even want to talk, right? Things like that. So let's see. So I'm looking at that whole person. Using my pendulum. I use my pendulum just all the time so that I'm kind of stay out of my mind, because I love to go there, right? So I use my pendulum constantly with questions, with deciding, following the energy, but choosing a treatment. And I see, like with that, in the hands, with the hand scan, there could be more, with the acute grief, it tends to be kind of hot. But with chronic grief, it's usually a heavier, stuck. There might be, whether there are tears or rips. I'm just checking out, of course, all of those things. And the energetic patterns that I see with acute grief, it's usually hot or warm. There might be rips or tears that feel kind of jagged. And tears come right away, usually for these people too. Their field is often contracted, but sometimes it's overexpanded, so there's no rule of exactly what it looks like, again, as Penny said. And with that acute grief, there's always a sense that soothing is needed in a really gentle approach to just be with this human being where they are. And then in the chronic grief, that's tends to be colder. The long-term leaks, like really tiny. The leak may be just really tiny over years and years, but it's still a leak. I often see this disconnection at the root or the crown, or both. And sometimes all the major energy centers are affected. Everything is off. the field is often contracted, so then that's just making everything more painful. They might need a deeper cleaning. I guess I'm getting out of the patterns here a little bit, but so if they're, I often see open heart to crown, or just those two, brow and crown, like Penny said. I see that a lot, right? Because there's this like throat stuckness too. And then I often see in people without a spiritual connection, they don't have this openness in the brow and the crown, and so it's super heavy down in the lower energy centers. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. And now kind of moving on to healing touch techniques that you're commonly using with clients experiencing grief, and why those techniques, are you finding those more effective? And Marilyn, if you wouldn't mind answering that.
Okay, so it's a hard question in that commonalities are kind of, yeah, that's an elusive thing. I think that when I've been treating grief at any time in my life, I found the need to go back to intuition and what's already been said about intake. It's a matter of getting out of yourself and what you might be expecting to see, and being present and really seeing that person in front of you. I feel that you have to have a really, really good knowledge, a really good handle on the individual techniques before you can be effective. But you can't set it up like a math problem. The techniques are your toolbox. And like any toolbox, if you use a hammer where you need a screwdriver, it's not going to work. So we have to be very aware of the fact that we know our techniques. We know basically what they're used for, why we're using them, but we also have to know that we can't have them so set in our minds that we don't have flexibility, because we need the intuitiveness. And if you know your techniques really well, then you can listen to the intuition more, because you're not going to be trying to figure out, how does this technique work? Why am I doing this? Blah, blah, blah. It's about, what am I seeing in this person? And what do they need? So I've made a list of some of the techniques that I have found most useful. Number one, of course, is chakra spread. And we are taught all along that this is the treatment, the main treatment for any kind of transition. And transitions create grief, whatever they are. So I've also found that for some people, it's absolutely not the first go-to technique. That some people are not ready for a chakra spread. That they're too unsettled. Grief shows in so many ways, but the chakra spread is perhaps the number one technique. Just I don't always use it right away. Maybe a few treatments in, yes, but not right away. Chakra connection. A lot of people are, as Penny and Elizabeth were saying, the energies are out of balance, right? And a person cannot deal with what's going on inside them if the energies are out of balance. So I've just found the chakra connection and magnetic clearing for a person in a first treatment. After listening and being open to listening and letting them talk, I find that sometimes it's those two techniques that are going to be the most beneficial at the beginning. You need a starting place. Like I've always found I need a starting place. And if I can see that somebody is way out of balance, I know that to try and get them to lay there through a chakra spread is not going to work. I have to settle them down somehow and do my best to bring the chakras, the energy field, to a place where that person can settle a bit. So I mentioned magnetic clearing as well. What I've noticed is if somebody's very agitated, the first few passes with the clearing should be quick. It's about matching their energy until they can slow it down. And then a pass that might be kind of fast can start becoming slower and slower as the person releases and relaxes. And I learned that from somebody who worked in a psych ward, and they would bring her in right at the beginning when somebody was so agitated. And when she demonstrated a clearing, it was really fast, because that's the only way she could calm them, was to match their energy. And it was a very good lesson for me. And I hope that you'll find that useful. Another thing is mind clearing. People in grief are trying to figure everything out because it's easier than dealing with what's going on sometimes. So I've used mind clearing a lot, especially once I get them balanced with chakra connection and everything. And very often with doing a mind clearing for somebody, I can watch the tension just drain, you know, because this is your motor, right? You don't work on a car without turning off the motor. So maybe you don't work on a person without turning off the motor. Anyhow, it has come in very handy. In advanced practice, I learned full body connection with guided relaxation. If you get a chance to take the advanced practice courses, do it. They are absolutely amazing. The guided relaxation with the full body connection has never failed me, not once. I've had people come in, their speech is all over the place, their actions are all over the place. They forgot to brush their hair. They're basically, I guess you could say, they're a bit of a mess, because that's the way their reaction, it's reacting, it's hyper. A guided meditation, starting with your hands on the feet. It's I've never had it fail. So if you have an opportunity to learn that, or if you'd like to come to Ontario, I'd be happy to teach you. But yeah, that's one of my absolutely most successful treatments for people with grief. And another one that we learned in advanced practice is connecting the chakras to the heart chakra, to Anahata, right? So you start there. It's only the seven main chakras, not the joints, etc. You start at the heart, and you can work either from the root or the crown, whichever feels right. It's another practice that's highly intuitive. And again, the heart in one way or another is broken. So if you can draw the energy back to the heart, somebody has a much better chance of doing their healing. And, you know, I think after saying everything I've said, I think it's really important that you do have a loose plan in mind, because the mind likes that. If you don't go through that step, then maybe you're going to be as jittery as your client, right? Like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? But again, like Elizabeth and Penny said, you got to let go of that. You need to have it. And sometimes it's exactly what you do. But for me, not very often. But I like having that to hang on to. And the best thing that I've learned is that It's absolutely not about me. It's about that person on the table. I worked with my girlfriend dying of cancer and going through her own grief because she was leaving her family. And I couldn't allow myself to feel my emotions until after she had passed. And so always, it's not about me. It's not about you. It's about the person who's on the table. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. And Victoria, would you like to add to that?
I would. I think what Marilyn said was extremely valuable for people. I think one of the first things that comes to my mind when somebody has a loss is a pain drain from the heart. I also think that if it's current, a mind clearing and a chakra connection just to keep them in their bodies and to settle down their mind from doing so much, doing so many different things and dealing with everything. One of the things that I wrote down was magnetic passes, hands in motion, to extend the energy field because some people close up. Because I worked with a lot of people with cancer, I would use ultrasound and magnetic passes, hands in motion, to like erase tumors and to extend the energy field where there's pain involved. I think if there's anything else. Oh, yeah. So a lot of people that go through cancer, they have problems with their bowels. And I use magnetic passes, hand still, to kind of soften that so that that's easier for them. And I think that's about it for, interventions.
Thank you, Victoria.
Sure.
I'm going to let you, Victoria, continue on to help answer our next question, which is about like how often and how long are you typically seeing clients with grief? And if you can tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I always allow them to make a choice on how often they want to see me. When I worked with palliative care, I saw people every other week. I saw people every week. I saw them once a month when they came in to see the nurse practitioner. So I would go to the infusion center every time they were in and do treatments with them. But I let them tell me what they think that they need. My sessions at the hospital are usually 45 minutes to an hour. And if clients are going through chemo, then I usually see them before the treatment, a couple days before the treatment, and then after the treatment to help them with their side effects. For the most part, I see them after they have completed all of their treatments. For people that are in my private practice that have either had a loss of an animal or a person or something like that, in the very beginning, I would see them probably every week and then space it out because when you're grieving, things hit you at different times. And so they manage it. I don't tell them when to come or when not to come. I just make suggestions of what they may need. And I think it's empowering our clients for their self-care. And that's what I try to do, is empower them to figure out what they need.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Penny, could you add to that, please?
I could actually, I do much the same when I was doing prior to COVID, going to the hospital when people were receiving their chemotherapy. I would go each time that they attended when they went to the hospital. The frequency for me is very, very varied. Sounds weird. It depends where they are, and we're talking about grief this time. And so I think during the sessions that we had for trauma support, the healing touch for there was only really sometimes my hand on the back of their neck and a hand on their heart. And for some during the 2-hour session, that's what I did, held their heart to keep them grounded, to keep them from dashing from the room, to keep them present, to make sure that they knew that someone cared for them. And that varied depending on the atmosphere in the room. I also found that, well, actually I would add going into a boardroom with the black suits and red ties. Usually for a lot of I was the only woman in the business world. For me to change the atmosphere to calm in that room, I saw how well it managed the atmosphere in the room for me to be grounded, fully present, and very calm. It set the tone of the room. So from learning from the board table to the trauma support group to in my home, that being present myself, the past bringing it forward, the future bringing it towards me, being present and in my body, completely grounded and connected myself, brings that calm that's required. What I find for the frequency then is that 2 hours is the maximum that I would see someone, and the follow-up session, as for most of us, is depending on the client. I also think that the dependency depends on how much they want to be touched. The mind clearing often isn't just so the mind. I think it's also the comfort of the touch. The liver cleanse is the comfort of the touch to increase the sweetness with the pancreas. Depending, some people cannot be touched at all, depending on the trauma from the past, especially here in the north, is that you can't touch them at all. So the frequency, I think, depends on what their body really needs as well. Often I think that, like I have one client that comes once a year, every spring she will come. And it depends on what is happening in our community. Of course, with COVID, I wasn't seeing anyone if they were to wear a mask, because then you can't read what's going on. But now, since COVID, the anxiety, the fear, the rage that's underneath the anxiety, I'm seeing more clients now, and they know that they need to come a little bit more often. So I will see them in a week and then in a month. But the one thing that I always make sure I do is I follow up with, I am here for you. I often send them a text following, letting them know again that I'm here, because oftentimes, especially around the grief situation, is that you raise even some emotions as they come into their body. And I really want to make sure that they are supported when they leave me. Our community, we have a lot of suicide here. There's suicide pacts with the youth, and it depends with what is going on in the communities. How often we see clients, how often we were going, on what topics we were to talk about, whether it was lateral violence or whether it was grief. All of that needs to have a follow-up support in person, or at least by telephone or text. And I also want to mention the mood of people in our community. We have the rainiest city in Canada. It rains 166 inches a year. And we usually get 200, and I wrote it down, 232 days of either rain, sleet, or snow. So you can imagine here, for some people that have, that's sad, the seasonal disorder, they will need to come more. And so it really, my practice comes and goes depending on the situation in our small community. And the frequency depends, like a young woman will come who's a young mom and anxious and grieving, and then we'll tell her friends. And so her friends will come and their friends will come. It depends also whether we're having we have our healing workshops that are a self-discovery workshops of 10 weeks. During those 10-week sessions, a lot of clients come as their emotions come up. Their recognition that they have grief come so they can get back into their bodies. The frequency also depends on the homework that they've had. Whether I always have handouts available for people. I have books that I give them as homework, or that I feel might be applicable to what's going on in their lives. And two of them are Just One Thing, The Buddha Brain by Rick Hansen, PhD. And the other one, It's Okay That You're Not Okay by Megan Devine. And Christine's put those on a list. And also the handouts might be a follow-up. And I learned during the session who is their circle of support. Do they have support from the family? Do they have a circle of friends? What professionals are they seeing to support them? And if they have no one, then I try to help them with that piece. And I always send people home with a journal and a pen, and gift them their sessions that way. So the frequency, there's not a clear answer, sorry. But that constant support, I think, for those that are healing and grieving needs to be there to make sure they are not alone, that there is someone there to compassionate listen to them so they can bring them back into their bodies energetically.
Great. Thank you, Penny. And yes, I have a whole list of resources that I will copy and paste and put in the chat that Penny gave me some and some of our other panelists. So I will share that in a minute. So our next question is about common practitioner observations and evaluations that you find. And Marilyn, could you answer that for us?
Yeah, again, it's varied, or as Penny said, very varied. And but one thing that I have noticed, perhaps above all other things, is that if I were looking for a commonality, it would be that people in grief need someone who is not involved to talk to. Somebody who's not affected by whatever's going on. So they need to be able to share their thoughts and their feelings honestly. And sometimes if it's another family member or someone else who's involved with whatever's going on, they don't feel that they can do that, because maybe the other person would be upset and in some cases the other person wants to just jump in and fix it rather than listen. So the compassionate listening is really important. And it's been mentioned to allow extra time wherever you possibly can, because it's not something that we can set a timer on and say, okay, time's up, where you go. And then any help that you've given is gone. They often find that advice from family and friends, although well-meaning, is not what they need, and that can end up in conflicts. So having somebody else to talk about becomes extremely important. The other thing that I've noticed is that when people are grieving, especially after a death that's sudden, it's kind of like their feet have been kicked out from under them. And there's some of them are scrambling so hard to find their grounding that they don't allow themselves to grieve, and they can't possibly figure things out. You know, it's not a time when we can figure things out, but it seems to be something that some people are grabbing onto, is this need to find their next step right now. Not later on, but right now. Part of that, I believe, is that they don't want to feel the grief. It really hurts. They don't want to feel the grief. So they try and move on from it too fast. When my good friend who also does healing touch, her husband died of cancer. And within a week, she was looking up courses and looking for jobs and looking for this and looking for that. And as we know, nature steps in, and she ended up very ill because she wasn't allowing herself to feel what she needed to feel. So once again, it goes back to intake. It goes back to using your intuition with the treatments you use. You have to be able to observe where somebody is, and that person might be on the opposite end of that spectrum and unable to do anything. And one of the things that I've noticed is when somebody's feeling that way, they don't take care of themselves well. And that shows up, especially if you know the person and you know how they typically would take care of themselves. Maybe they're not conscious of how they're dressing. They're not conscious of how they're presenting themselves. They don't have anything to say, whereas normally they would. My thought is that at the beginning of grief, yeah, this is all unique and normal. If something like that carries on for an extended period of time, we have to watch it. I have, not often, but a few times, I have had sent people to a psychologist, to a counselor, to a grief counselor, because at that point in time, they need something extra. Maybe you could refer to it as kind of a boost to get them going again. So commonalities are, everybody's different, but I think the normal thing is that people have their feet knocked out from under them, and they're going to react in different ways to that. And they need somebody that is outside of the group to help them with that. And that's where we come in as practitioners. And that's where we need to have our list of people that we can refer our clients to if they need to go a step beyond what I can offer, what you can offer. Yeah. So
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. Very good point with the referrals. And Penny, could you add a little bit more about common practitioner observations and evaluations?
I think the observations when I thought about that, I thought of during the healing touch session itself with the person, if they're on your table, when they begin to relax, I bring it to their attention that this is what it feels like to be in your body, to be able to relax, to be able to connect to heaven and earth, and from that place ask for help. So that when I read their body language, when I see those altered state indications, I bring it to their attention for the most part. We talk about sweetness in life, being joy from the pancreas. that liver cleanse, when I do, depending on the evaluation of the client, I talk about what I am actually doing with and for them at the time. A liver cleanse, for example, we're talking about their anger and their grief and their sorrow and balancing that with the joy in their life. And I always make sure that they know when I am grounding them, connecting them to the earth so that they can hear what I'm saying when they leave, with hopefully a few tools such as, tapping or walking in the forest, being able to drink more, eat properly, and to rest and recognize that it is only a process for them and that it's fine where they are right now in their grief process, that's what they need to do for now and to not worry about tomorrow, but to be totally present in their bodies with what is going on with them right now and to acknowledge that. So the observation, I quite pay attention during a healing touch session, and then the evaluation at the end also depends on where they are in their healing process, how I approach that.
Great, thank you. And now moving on to kind of common client feedback that you receive following a session or multiple sessions. And Elizabeth, if you can share a little bit about that.
Thank you. I think I'm continuing with the theme of very varied, as that is how it is. But I would say in general, if I can make a generalization, most people rest very deeply. And some, I would say maybe 10% find the treatment activating or they feel worse for a while. So that is just part of this work. And so it's good to be ready for that as a practitioner, like, and get my own needs or expectations about my work out of the way. It's just good to let that go because everybody is in, as everyone on the panel has said, all people in grief, all of us are in our own normal and unique process. So, yeah. All right. So their feedback, tends to be that they feel better, they feel held, they feel lighter. A lot of people say, I feel lighter, I feel a little hopeful, or they've just been able to touch into that center of joy that the grief makes space for. And then in terms of relief, I would say most people will have some relief after one session. And again, it's very varied, so there's not a definite. I have some really self-directed clients. Some of it is people's personality and how that they'll show up because they want to work on the grief. And so that's what we do. And I just use my pendulum, like, when should this person come back? And then I make a recommendation to them and say, of course, you are in charge of your own healing, and your sense of when to come back is absolutely right on. And my recommendation would be there would be some benefit from you coming back in 3 weeks. So I try to balance that because as a practitioner, just as a human being, I tend to not want to tell people what to do, but I also realize they are coming to see me. So I want to make a recommendation and then really honor their choice to follow up on that or not. So a common plan for someone who really wants to work on something might be once a week for 2, 3, 4 weeks, depending, and then every couple of weeks for maybe a month, and then monthly or whatever. So that's something that I've done with a number of people. With the more chronic grief, it tends to be we're giving them something to work on in that session. Almost, it may just be so I just see them one time, and then they come back when they're ready to come back, and they take away their homework and work on it if they want to. And just little bits of home, just the littlest bit, not a lot. Let's see. And I think I mentioned some of this earlier, but I'll just say what I do hear from what I'm really encouraging in people is this greater capacity to nourish themselves because of the disembodiment that grief can tend to bring. As people come back into their bodies, then they can take a little better care of themselves. I mean, both Marilyn and Victoria, or Marilyn and Penny, were talking about this and what people look like their ability to just take care of themselves. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about this maybe in our next question. So, yeah, I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. And Marilyn, could you add a little bit more about common client feedback?
I've noticed, I agree with Elizabeth, that I would say that 90% of the people I have seen have had relief in the first session. And the most common thing that I have heard from them as feedback was, I feel calmer. I feel more relaxed. With the understanding that, if in my practice, I found that if the grief was very fresh, that feeling of calmness and stuff didn't last very long. It is important that they come back, and some know that on their own. Some make an appointment and never do come back. And you have to let it go. I really liked Penny's idea about handing out a journal with a pen. I journal all the time, and it's such a beautiful tool. I've come to understand that that grief, we think of it as the heart and stuff, but there's physical concerns with a result of grief. And that's another thing that we as practitioners have to watch, like, oh, my stomach's not feeling very well today, or something like that. Anxieties that they can't identify. So I just feel like grief is a form of trauma. And it kind of needs to be dealt with in that way. There is a trauma treatment that I don't have it down pat, that's done in the second advanced practice thing. It's difficult to do. And I think I've only done it maybe twice, but it's treating it as trauma. I've also had people come for treatments that had nothing to do with grief. And then I find out about this old grief from a long time ago. And once they recognize that, in my practice anyhow, I just found that they were able to clear things faster. And maybe it was because that in their subconscious, they were working on it. And to bring it to the surface and clear it was, in my experience, just a little bit easier than dealing with a grief that was immediate. So yeah, it's just, we were asked about medication, and did we see a difference in people's use of medication? And that is quite honestly something I haven't dealt with. Most of the people I dealt with grief were more likely to do it through treatment, through yoga, through meditation, and maybe through herbs, natural practices. I only saw one person that needed medication, and that was because their blood pressure elevated with the onset of the grief. So, and it only had to be medicated for a short period of time. But that's the only instance I've ever dealt with medication. I don't know, Elizabeth, if you've ever had to deal with that at all. Yeah, but I haven't, no. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth, did you want to talk about the medication part?
Yeah, I did neglect to mention that. I do offer, as an herbalist, I do offer that plant support to people because it's in my scope of practice, and that is it can be really, really important, even just as a flower essence or a plant essence level, like a drop dose of a plant is very much helps people ground in. In fact, as I was like making my little altar for today, there's hawthorn there and motherwort and rose, and I'm just mentioning some of my favorites, and actually black cohosh, which is really good for a long time stuck grief. And I see Marilyn. So Marilyn and I will have to chat later about the plants. So having that plant accompaniment can be, and you don't even have to take it in. You can just hold it. You can just meditate with the plant. But that connection to the earth can be really, really important. So, and then with medication, I have had people, kind of like as Marilyn was saying, I've had a couple of people take more medication because they were able to resource themselves. Like it gets back to that, what do you need? Not how are you, but what do you need? And one client I'm thinking of specifically, she has been on a pharmaceutical antidepressant really for many years. And after a number of treatments, she just said, you know what? I need to increase my dose. And thank you for helping me figure that out. So I learned so much from that, because here's this person, like I could just let go of, tend to have a lot of judgment about medication and that we should be taking less, but maybe somebody needs a little more. So I just want to put that out there to really trust our clients and the people we serve, and to know what they need. And the more that we hold space for that, like we don't know what that looks like for anyone. So and I learned so much from my client that day. So I'm glad to pass that on. And thanks, Mary.
Great, thank you. Thanks for adding that. So regarding common plans that you make with clients following sessions, as far as referrals and growth work, self-care, and I know some of you have kind of mentioned a little bit about that, but I'm wondering, Victoria, if you can share a little bit.
Sure, be happy to. When Elizabeth was talking about her herbs and things like that, she actually was empowering her client for their self-care. And I think
there you are. Okay.
I like to teach them how to ground themselves, and I like to teach them how to breathe and feel their breath down in their lungs, lower lungs. And I think those two things are probably the best things that you can do for somebody to start them out with. And if they like to journal, I think journaling is great. I think I asked one of my clients what she felt about forgiveness. And she says, oh, I forgive people all the time. And I said, but what about yourself? Are you forgiving yourself? And I think some people just don't, they want to work through things, or they, everybody's different. Also, there's a lot of people that want to help you, and sometimes you don't want help, or they're suggesting that you take a rest, and you don't want to take a rest. So I encourage people to give them something to do for you, so that it keeps other people busy and they're not so occupied about taking, really, they're taking care of you in a different way. And, everything changes, so it's, this too shall pass. And I know particularly when my husband passed away, it took me about a year to go to a therapist. And I think one of the things that I went to the therapist is I didn't know how to be. It was just like, what was my purpose? I didn't know at that time, but I didn't get there till about a year after he died. So it was interesting that I had that type of conversation with a therapist. And I think that that's, when you're ready to talk to somebody, I think it's important to refer clients to somebody that they may resonate with. So I think first and foremost, it's about grounding and breathing, and then it's about giving other people jobs so that they don't irritate you. And to know that this is all temporary. Everything, time heals. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Victoria.
Sure.
And Elizabeth, would you like to share some more about common plans?
Sure. And I just resonated so much with all of what Victoria was saying. So giving people that practice of just using your breath, exhaling down into your feet to the earth, inhaling, connecting, and then come back to your heart. And that it can be as easy as just one exhale, inhale, exhale. So trying to make sure that people leave with something super simple. The tendency, especially when people are in this sort of post-treatment state, I often send an email with whatever because they may have forgotten it, or if I'm in person, I give them a piece of paper. Who knows what they do with it? So I often send an email. I do like to ask people, like, what do you need right now? And not necessarily right after the treatment, but I always follow up just 1 to 3 days, either with a text or an email. That's just part of my process. Not everybody responds, but some people do. And especially with grief, I always make sure that people have my cell phone number. And I'm not a counselor, but I think, as one of you mentioned, I've forgotten who mentioned it, for people who really don't have anybody else in their life, I just want them to have my number. And there's something, it's like it's like it's in their pocket and they never use it. Hardly anybody ever reaches out. I've not had any issues. Anyway, that's enough. I won't say anything more about that. But just saying you can reach out if you need to is something that I like to do. And so I follow up with them. Making referrals if they need it. Something I learned in my own grief journey was you can schedule a lot of help or support or other treatments, and you can always cancel them. As long as you cancel them a day ahead. It was the best advice. It wasn't really advice, but it was just schedule a lot. Just have some acupuncture, have some body work, schedule your therapist. You'll have to wait 6 weeks anyway, and then you can cancel if you don't want to go. But it was great because, resource yourself. I think that's what I really want to just resource. How can you resource yourself? Did you eat? Are you able to sleep? Are you, and sometimes people aren't even connected to that. My digestion really has been off. So sometimes a little homework that I would say to someone is, okay, I'd love for you to make yourself some soup and eat it. And if making soup, like going to the grocery and making soup, that's too much, just go buy some soup, that's made, that's delicious, and put it in your prettiest bowl and sit down at your table and eat it. Just even suggesting a tiny ritual of eating. So those are just some of those things. And my groundedness, our groundedness as healers is so important for these clients. So like our ability to stay in our own energy, and I know others of you mentioned this too, to just stay grounded, stay present, stay neutral, and deal with our own grief or anything that gets triggered for us later in a different setting is really important. The challenge is things can get worse before they get better, right? That's part of the reason I want people to have my phone number, or be in some kind of email discussion, because even though we do the healing in an hour-long session, or whatever, hour and a half, without a clock, but that's usually what it is. I just I kind of lost my train of thought there. Anyway, I just want them to know things can sometimes get more intense, and that's not weird or bad or anything. It's just the process. All right. People can be afraid of the grief, of the depth of the grief, and going there too. So that is a challenge. Especially if people don't have a community or rituals that they're already using, or they feel like, or they don't have a regular spiritual practice. That can be a challenge for people. So just encouraging them to find a meditation practice. It's 5 minutes a day, whatever. It can be chopping the carrots. It does not have to be sitting on a cushion. It can be walking outside. Just the beginning to make some of those little connections for people can be helpful. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. And Marilyn, I'm wondering if you could share a success story with us.
Yeah, the one I chose is not about a death. It's about a woman who was losing her job. And Judy had been a long-term client of mine for years. She had aches and pains, and she loved her aromatherapy massage and this and that. And she was a student. She learned to do it as well. And she loved healing touch, and she took, I don't know, a few levels of healing touch as well. But she had this job that suited her very well. It was very close to home. The hours worked. She'd been there for years, and it wasn't thrilling, but it was okay. And she planned to retire from there. And she was in her late 50s, and her job was ending. She was being laid off. So Judy is a very hyper person anyhow. Getting her to ever settle down was always a little bit iffy, but I was very fond of her. Anyhow, she came in, she couldn't think, she was all over the place, and even her motions and her actions and her hands were going and her head was going, and she really was a mess. So I couldn't do a chakra spread right away. I did for her. I had to really had to think about what the best thing to do first. She'd had healing touch many times in her life, but I found with her and with other clients I have had that are kind of hyper, that whole full body connection with the guided relaxation was the one thing that I could quiet her down with. And she was able to settle. She was able to settle after that. And then I did a mind clearing, which for her was kind of essential. And she came back the next week. And at that point, I started with the spiral meditation. She had really started to calm. I started with that. I balanced the energies with chakra connection and some clearing. And it was the third time that she came that we did do the chakra spread. And she knew these treatments. So she was aware of what was happening. And I found that was the right time. And she responded well. I also held her feet to ground her because she was nowhere near being grounded. And I also, at the end, just rested my hands on her shoulders. So because of the heart-shoulder connection. In the end, she was able to settle down. It didn't happen right away, and it couldn't because of, well, her personality, her natural energy. She couldn't settle right away, but she did, and she accepted a job that wasn't really up her alley, but she could make a fair bit of money in a short period of time. And then along with that, she and her partner took courses to become travel agents online. So she settled into something for now and made plans for what she wanted to do later on. So it was always wonderful to watch her settle because she was so very much the opposite of being settled. she was an amazing woman, but again, yeah, that worked out very successfully. And the only other one that I really wanted to mention was, again, the woman who I didn't even know she had grief. I did not know that she had a daughter and unborn grandchild who had been killed in a car accident a couple of years before that. But she came for reflexology because she was having some physical concerns. And after I did the first reflexology treatment, I just said, Janice, would you like to come back for a healing touch treatment? I think we can help you. And she right away, she said yes. And she came back and she was so intuitive herself. Like afterwards, she said, this was not a physical treatment. This was spiritual. And you know, what it did for her was, in one treatment, was absolutely amazing, but she was absolutely ready for it too. So, and I don't see her often, but every now and then I'll run into her somewhere, and just the connection is incredible. When you work with people and you help them through these things, the connection is there. You might not see them for a couple of years, but every time you see them. And maybe that's why I think that this work is so rich, because the energy is just always there, and it's so precious. So yeah, just keep doing the work, as Janet said.
Thank you for sharing those amazing success stories. I know we're getting close on time here. We have a couple more questions left. So feel free, those of you that need to jump off, we are recording, so you'll be able to see the end here. But I wanted to give an opportunity for Penny to share a success story as well.
Thank you. I think for me, the success story started when I very first started to do healing touch, that I was given the opportunity as a nurse to see how healing touch worked by following the monitors. I was a skeptic. I didn't think that I was doing anything. So when the atrial fib went into normal sinus rhythm, and when the patient was biting on the ventilator tubes, when she settled with healing touch, and that dopamine drip that this woman was so sensitive to, that I could do healing touch and change my mind about the way this works. And so from that, I was able to really build on my practice, because I was shown on the monitors scientifically that other side of my brain was taken care of. So to understand our community a bit more, is that we have more than 50% First Nations people living in our community, and with a huge cross-section of many cultures in our community. And that's something that we haven't brought up, about being attentive to the beliefs and the cross-cultural caring that we need to do with the different belief systems and nationalities. And for ourselves and the First Nations community, it's very special for us here. So traditions really follow high in our lifestyle. But I can just briefly talk about a woman who came to our trauma support group, who had been grieving unmanageably for 6 years. And the one evening that I had my hand on her heart and my hands on her shoulders, she got a relief from a headache that had been there for years, and her shoulders were able to drop so that she felt relaxed that night. With a follow-up session then, to make that long story, how that progress went and what our plan was that she had to do the work alone, but she didn't have to do it by herself. And so now her husband, her burly husband, is even coming and laying on the table. Her autistic daughter is also coming with a hug at the end. And my hugs tend to be long, compassionate. And so I think that her success story for me right now in my heart, and I asked her if I could use her, and I won't give the details because it is a small community, but I'm so proud of her. She's been able to reach out to her personal family with the tools that we were able to give to her, with her sharing of her grief story within the group at the trauma support session. And then it does take a community to help build someone up, to support them, to give them the strength to step forward in their lives. And I'm so proud of her that she's reached out to her personal family. It's really lovely. So thank you.
Thank you.
And Christine, remember I had that Please Be Gentle After Loss creed that I thought I could read at the end. Would you mind? It takes about 1.5 minutes.
Okay.
May I do that?
Yeah, why don't we finish up with our last question, and then
All right.
that would be great. Thank you, Penny. So our last question is just about challenges or anything else that you didn't share that you think would be helpful for our listeners. And Elizabeth, if you have anything to share.
I did mention, it feels like a lot of this has already been mentioned, so I'll just mention again how the challenges that I see are that sometimes people are afraid of the grief, afraid to go into, to let themselves be held in that, that they'll get lost in it, that when they leave, how are they going to be resourced to deal with it because of whatever their situation is. So that is just a challenge that comes up. And I think some of the things I mentioned in the plans connect into that. Let's see. And just the importance, a challenge, I think, for any of us, because grief is such a universal experience, is for us as practitioners to just really constantly ground, connect, and center ourselves, just over and over again, so that we can be that accompanying presence for someone who is on our table or that we're in this healing relationship with. So we can deal with our stuff later, but there is something about grief that it's real. It's real that we will get triggered. It's real that it might seem overwhelming to us, but it's what this person is walking with on a daily basis. So just honoring our own needs and making sure we're taking really good care of ourselves like that. Do a treatment, do a self-care. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yeah, there was a question here, which you kind of answered it a little bit, of is there anything special that any of you do for your own grief? Yeah, Marilyn.
I've had a lot of losses in my life, and a lot of them unexpected and very tragic. I do a chakra connection every single day before I get out of bed. I do mantra every day before I leave my bedroom. I journal regularly. I do things that bring me joy. I spend time with my grandchildren. I belong to a few groups. I'm associated with Yashodhara Ashram in BC, and I have Zoom groups that are very, very nurturing for me. The first tragic grief in my life, I never had anything like this, and I've got to tell you, it was the next best thing to impossible. We have to keep learning, and we have to keep expanding on our self-care, on our spirituality, whatever that is for each individual. It has to feel real to you, and there have to be daily practices. They might be that big, they might be that big. One day they might be 2 minutes long, and another day an hour. But do something. Do yoga, do Tai Chi, do meditation, something wherein you feel grounded. Some people like to bake, but something that brings you to a place where the grief isn't always bringing you down. There's a song that Eric Clapton sings. It's not his own song. It's an old song. But one of the lines is, "You can make diamonds from the rain." And another line is, "You can find joy inside the pain." And that's what I've discovered through grief, is if you can see the sun rays shining through the clouds, you can do it. And we need to take care of ourselves all the time, every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. And Victoria, was there any challenges that you wanted to share, or anything else that you didn't get to share?
Well, I think for some people don't know what to say to somebody who's lost somebody. And I was given the chance to, well, I think it's important to ask the person who they lost what was so special about them. And you can see this light that happens over their face and this joy that comes in about what was so special about the person that they lost. I think for the people from the outside trying to figure out what to do with somebody that they know has lost somebody, I think that that's one of the suggestions that I would make. And I know one time I was doing healing touch in an ICU with someone, and the nurse came in and said that the family didn't want me to continue. And the one thing that the nurse said was, "Don't take it personally." And I don't. If somebody wants me to stop healing touch, that's totally okay. It's an education that they don't have. It's an understanding that they don't know. And I think that you just have to respect people for where they are. So that was different for me. Yeah, and can happen.
Yeah, great. Thank you. We had one question here, and I think this was more for you, Elizabeth. And it was, what do you notice with clients who have chronic grief when they have a recent acute event?
Thank you for that question. It's very much like a trauma response often, I would say. So it's that stacked grief or chronic grief and then a fresh grief on top of it. It can be it can be overwhelming. And I generally, I'm just thinking of my experience, I would be called to do a really gentle treatment. Like maybe the the spiral meditation on the heart. I use that one a lot, actually, just because I find it very soothing as a treatment. And just encouraging people to really resource themselves fully. Like if they have a therapist, to do are you seeing your therapist? So I'll just ask those more open-ended, like, have you thought about having therapy? So the words that's not really what I want to say, but I'm just learning constantly better ways to word things, right? What would be supportive for you? Have you done any therapy? Was that helpful? That kind of, let's see, suggesting they come in a little bit more. I mean, I actually started a group evening distance session that I do monthly, like a month on, a month off. I actually did it for a long 2 years during the pandemic, or a year and a half, without stopping, and that let people have a real affordable, economical way to have some energy work that wasn't a one-on-one, because the one-on-one, I mean, as a private practitioner, it can be expensive for people, but these groups, so having some kind of group support energetically regularly is helpful. Just continuing to add to their toolkits of practices. There are so many practices, and it's so, as many of the panelists have said today, just having finding the practices that work for you, whether those are physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, all the practices, knowing what you as a human being need. So supporting people to find that if they don't have that in their lives.
Yeah, thank you. Great. Well, we don't have really many other questions, so I think we'll move on since we're already over. I did just put everyone's contact information in the chat, so you have that, and that'll be included when we send out the recording as well. I wanted, Penny, for you to have a chance to read your creed if you would like to do so.
If that would be okay.
Okay.
The one thing I must say that we haven't mentioned, and I know everybody, has just slipped our mind, about having a gratitude journal for our clients and about their ability to be able to receive at a whole new level with their whole new life that will never be normal again. I just wanted to add that. So thank you. So I will read this. Perhaps in closing, Christine, you'll have a few words, but it'll just take a minute to read.
Okay.
It's a after loss creed. Please be gentle with me, for I am grieving. The sea I swim in is a lonely one, and the shore seems miles away. Waves of despair numb my soul as I struggle through each day. My heart is heavy with sorrow. I want to shout and scream and repeatedly ask, why? At times my grief overwhelms me, and I weep bitterly. So great is my loss. Please don't turn away or tell me to move on with my life. I must embrace my pain before I can begin to heal. Companion me through my tears and sit with me in loving silence. Honor where I am in my journey, not where you think I should be. Listen patiently to my story. I may need to tell it over and over again. It's how I begin to grasp the enormity of my loss. Nurture me through the weeks and months ahead. Forgive me when I seem distant and inconsolable. A small flame still burns within my heart, and shared memories may trigger both laughter and tears. I need your support and understanding. There is no right or wrong way to grieve. I must find my own path. Please, will you walk beside me?
Thank you, Penny. That was beautiful. Thank you. Just in closing, I wanted to thank everyone who participated and joined us today, and a special thank you to our panelists, Elizabeth, Marilyn, Victoria, and Penny. Thank you for taking this time to share your experience with us, to help us all in our own practices and in our own life. As always, I'm always open to feedback and suggestions, so I did put my email address there. Feel free to reach out to me. Our next Healer Development Series topic is on chronic pain, and that'll be on Friday, June 3rd at 12:30 Central, and you'll get an email about that. And if you are a certified practitioner or instructor or retired in those, you want to be a panelist for this series, please also feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. And thanks again, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.